So the title of my talk is a bit long, 10 vegan things I changed my mind about in 20 years of activism. It could be 9 things, I didn't count them. You can ask your money back if it's not 10 but 9, I don't know. So yeah, as Martin said, I was active, or I am active in a couple of organizations, and let me just mention SIVA there, which is the Center for Effective Vegan Advocacy, with which Melanie Joy and I give trainings, vegan advocacy trainings all over the world. And if you'd like to host a training in your country or with your group, you can find me here at the conference. I'm here till tomorrow afternoon. But before I did all these things, I had an organization for 15 years, from 2000 to 2015, that was called EVA, Ethical Vegetarian Alternative. I led it, I was director of it for 15 years. And 15 years after founding it, I had a burnout. I was home with a depression for 6 or 9 months, I don't remember. And I was examining why I had that burnout. And by now I know that I know some of the reasons why I had that burnout. And one of the reasons is that basically I'm a person who always doubts, who doubts everything. And if you doubt everything, it's hard to be a boss. It's hard to be a manager. It's hard to make decisions. It's hard to tell people what to do. So that was not my strong suit, right? And then so it led me to waste a lot of energy on all kinds of things that I shouldn't be spending energy on. And in the end, I quit, and I thought, like, maybe I'm more efficient as a thinker. And so that's what I do. Basically, I doubt a lot. I am uncertain. I recently put this message on my Facebook. When people tell me they're not sure they agree with me, then I usually tell them I'm not sure I agree with what I'm saying either. And a lot of people appreciate that. I mean, you see the likes, right? But my best friend, the chief commissioner of the vegan police, he quoted me. He quoted this, and he said, like, if you need a reason to not to listen to anything the misnomered vegan strategist says, then this has to be it. If he doesn't agree with what he is saying, why is he saying it? Maybe he's getting paid. So you see, not everybody appreciates doubt, and people actually want you to be sure of that. But I think that, yes, there is definitely value in being very confident and very sure and feeling very empowered. There is value in that, particularly in a situation like this when it's us against the rest of the world, right? We should be sure of ourselves, enough sure of ourselves. But then on the other hand, I see too many people in this world being too sure of themselves. And I guess you know what that looks like. You know, too many people being too sure of themselves, something like this. You know what it looks like on Facebook when we are too sure of ourselves, and when we are sure that our opinion is the right one, we just fight, right? And I guess ultimately being entirely convinced that you are right, without any question, without any shadow of a doubt, can lead to really bad things, right? And so I'm worried sometimes that people in our movement are a bit too sure of themselves. And I would like to say that also within the vegan movement, some doubt is a good thing. Why is it a good thing? Because, well, we might be mistaken. This is a very complicated world. We know every day we know more about the world, and every day we can be found, our knowledge may be found outdated. We are subject to groupthink. We are often thinking what the other people in our group think. We sometimes dare not to think differently. I mean, we are vegan, we think differently from this whole carnivorous, carnistic world, of course, but are we thinking independently enough inside our movement? We are part very much of an ideology, of a system ourselves. And also another reason is that we ask other people to change their minds. We ask other people to be open-minded and to doubt what they're eating, etc. So we should do the same. And thirdly, is a pragmatic reason, we can actually be more convincing if we seem less convinced. Research has shown that, like for presenters, for instance, people standing in front of you like I do, that if now and then I say I'm not sure of that, I have to look this up, then you will trust me more than when I pretend to have all the answers, right? I illustrate it sometimes with this ad. Some people may know this ad. Carlsberg, the best beer in the world. You can see that. I deleted one word. Do you know what it is? Yes. The original ad is probably. And it's a much more interesting and more convincing ad with that little bit of doubt added there, I think. So what I'm talking about is to be open-minded, and to be open-minded means that now and then you will actually change your mind, or changing your mind is a sign that you are open-minded. And so I think that's really necessary, also especially in this movement, even when we think we're very sure of everything. So we have to basically constantly update ourselves. We have to be like Windows, right? This is very annoying when I see more and more of this, but you have to be constantly updating yourself. For the Mac people, so that they don't feel left out, update yourselves. Okay. So let me ask you, are there any vegan or animal rights issues that you change your mind about? You don't have to tell me the answer today, but you can ponder that in your bed or in your bath tonight. No, I guess you won't be taking a bath tonight. But you can ponder that at some point, and really think about if you ever change your mind about something. I'll tell you about some stuff that I changed my mind about. So the first thing is that I used to think that we are the only ones with a clear view on things. Let me explain what I mean with that. If you look at the industry, the people who produce the meat, they have billions and billions of advertising money, and they throw ads at us, telling us that it's good to eat meat, but we all know that it is just a message that they're sending out because they want to make a profit, because they're greedy, because they want to make money. And we are completely different, right? We have this very clear goal of creating a vegan world, and we do that for the animals, and that's it. That's our agenda, right? We are not into it for profit, etc. Yet still, I think we have to be careful. I once opened a fortune cookie, and there was a message in there, and the message said, "Remember, no one is immune to bias." The reason I made a picture of it was that first I thought that this fortune cookie knew my name, you know. No one is immune to bias. I was freaked out. But the message, no one is immune to bias, is a very important one. And we can very well examine our own biases, especially when we're not talking about the animals. When we are talking about health, for instance, or the environment, we have to really seriously wonder, is our pro-animal bias or pro-vegan bias playing some role here, right? You may know that many people have said that this documentary is vegan propaganda and has been exaggerated, gives an exaggerated message. This, I think, in itself is kind of like suffering from vegan bias. I mean, you can, I think, be an environmentalist and eat meat. There's people who do wonderful things for the environment and who are not vegan, right? So that's always something to be careful about. And even when we look at what we do or what is happening to animals, we might have a bias in the sense that we might have this abolitionist bias. We are all in favor of abolishing the whole system so that we can't even see improvements in welfare, for instance. I'll come back to that in a minute. So the point here is, or another way to put it is, you have freed yourself from the carnistic box, and good for you, congratulations. You jumped out of the carnistic box, but just make sure you don't end up in the vegan box and you keep having an open mind. So rather than thinking that we are the only ones with a clear view, I now believe that we're much more biased actually than we think. And we have a wonderful and a beautiful message that can be very convincing. Let's bring it in the right way. Let's not exaggerate it, because our message and our case in itself is strong enough without us adding fantasy to it. The second one is that I used to believe it all depends on us. I was thinking like, oh my God, all these animals suffering. We are the vegans, such a small group, but it's up to us to change that. We are the only ones who want to change that, and we are the only ones who can and will change that. And unfortunately, I was wrong with that. It's not just us. There's the vegan movement, yes, but we've been joined by so many planet and health organizations, sustainability and health organizations, who also talk about reducing meat consumption. And more recently, we've been joined by a lot of companies, businesses. Maybe they're in the business for making money, but they are really helping us a lot by, for instance, selling, even just at the beginning of this year, 25 million pieces of just one burger. Can you imagine 25 million burgers being sold? What kind of an impact that has? Or here's another example. Of all the milk being sold in the world today, 13% is already plant-based milk. That is not just our work. That's not just the result of vegan advocacy. That's the result of also people talking about health, people talking about the planet. That's the result of businesses developing great alternatives for milk, etc. So it's not just us alone, but we are important. We, the vegan movement, we try to tell people that it is unethical to consume animal products. The organizations in the field of sustainability and health want to show that it's unsustainable, both for health and the environment. And business is trying to make these animal products just redundant. And we have to work in tandem with them, together. So rather than believing it all depends on us, I now believe that we are one important part of it. This should be a relief. It's not just us. We are a big movement, but we're at the same time a small movement, you know? And it's really good that we get help from all these other parts of society. Number 3, what I believed is that it's all about personal change. If you want to look good and wise, you quote Gandhi, so I'll do that. Be the change that you wish to see in the world. You all know that quote. And it sounds so beautiful and it sounds so great. But that is not the whole story. Personal change, that's about this. You know, you want to make people climb uphill so that they tip the system, and you motivate them. You make them aware, and you try to motivate them mainly by moral arguments to change personally in their behavior, in their diet. And that's what we mean when we say, like, it's not a diet, it's not a phase, it's a permanent lifestyle change. It's a personal change, it's a lifestyle change that is very important in our eyes. Let me give you an example of something that points to something else that could also be very useful. There was a poll recently, last year, I think, in the United States, where they asked people if they would be in favor of banning slaughterhouses in the US. Are you in favor of closing all the slaughterhouses? You know? And half of the people said yes. Half of the people said yes, let's close all the slaughterhouses. And the people organizing the poll were so surprised that they made a follow-up question, and they asked, were you aware that slaughterhouses where livestock are killed and processed into meat such that without them you would not be able to consume meat? Were you aware of that? Just checking. And actually most were, but quite a few were not. You wonder where these people think that meat comes from. But the point here is that even after checking for that, there was a significant amount of people still in favor of closing all the slaughterhouses, much more than the number of vegans. And what does this mean? I think it means that people might be very open to change if they're not the only ones changing. If there's an institutional change, if there's, for instance, a law that says you all have to do this, then many people might say, like, look, I didn't want to do it just by myself. I don't want to be the sucker to give this up. But if everybody has to do it, I'll go along. You understand? So maybe to give an example that you could better understand or apply, suppose you might say, like, look, I'm in favor of paying more taxes. Paying more taxes maybe just for developmental aid, right? But you might not just do that by yourself. But when the government would say everybody now has to pay an extra 5% taxes that will go to developmental aid, you might say, yes, I'm totally in favor of that. Let's all do that, right? So that's institutional change, or that's one example. So rather than just encouraging people to climb that hill here, we attach like an institutional weight here, and we change the whole thing. We make the slide less steep at first, and in the end, we can make it so that actually it becomes the way of least resistance, and people just slide down, you know? Even the people who didn't want, they just go with the flow, go where the majority goes. So rather than believing it's all about personal change, I now believe that personal change is very hard without institutional change. Personal change is something that only a percentage of the people will do, percentage of the population will do. And we are among those, among that percentage, but not everybody will. And we can try to talk to them and try to morally motivate them till the cows come home, right? But they still might not change, and they might need other things to change. The fourth one is veganism is the answer. You might be surprised, is it not then? Well, of course, it's a big part of the solution, but maybe sometimes we are overemphasizing it. And I think this poster that was photographed at an animal rights conference in the United States shows it very nicely. What the animals need. It's not celebrities, it's not the liberal media, it's not lettuce bikinis, sure. It's not vegetarianism, but it's not even donations, it's not even yoga, it's not even compassion or love or petitions, and it's certainly not Peter Singer. What the animals need here, according to this picture, is veganism. And you see the incredible confidence and the incredible weight we attach to veganism. And I used to think that too when I was always trying to convince everybody around me to go vegan, until I realized that, well, many people are not going to do that, but every serious effort that people makes them part of the solution. Some people say, like, if you're not vegan, you're part of the problem. I would say, well, if you make enough effort, you help increase demand, and that will create more vegan options. And then so you're part of the solution. So everything below vegan, I mean, some things below vegan at least, like being veganish or being a vegetarian or whatever, that's all very helpful too. And the way I would like to say it is with the words of a zero waste chef. And maybe you've seen this. We don't need a handful of people doing zero waste perfectly. We need millions of people doing it imperfectly, right? And so we're so focused on having a small group of people doing it perfectly, but we forget the impact of a much bigger group of people doing it imperfectly. I don't know exactly how the numbers are, but I like to think of it something like this. If we can make 70% of the people 70% vegan, the rest will take care of itself. The rest will go vegan. They will go more vegan and the world will become vegan. If we have this critical mass, this may be 80%, maybe 60%, I don't know, but the point is it doesn't have to be perfect right away for everybody. So rather than believing that veganism is the answer, I think sometimes we're focusing too much on it. Animal rights are what matters, is what I believed, or the only thing that matters. And you all know the difference between welfare and rights, right? And we are all on the side of the rights. We're all, I think, abolitionists in the sense that we want to stop the use of animals, the exploitation of animals, the injustice against animals. And I think it's very clear what the difference is with the people who just want to improve the welfare and would keep these animals in existence and make things just a bit better. And I think there is a really big difference, and we have to be aware of that difference, and we can make people aware of that difference. But the point is not to throw out the baby with the bathwater and to say that all reforms in terms of animal welfare are useless. You know, we want to stop this, of course, we want to stop this from happening. But if some people are helping it change into something like this, it would be not so wise, I think, to deny the difference between these two systems. It would not be wise to deny the difference between this and this. And this is not me talking about, or me being an apologist and saying that better meat is okay, but it is about taking into account well-being, taking into account welfare, and not spitting on the work of the people who are basically waging welfare campaigns. You know, like many organizations are doing. They're probably doing a great job in making people more aware, in getting people closer to caring for animals and caring enough so that in the end they might say, well, I care so much about their welfare now, why should I actually use them? Why should I eat them? So rather than thinking that animal rights are what matters or are the only thing that matters, I believe that well-being is important too, and that organizations and people who are doing campaigns for welfare, for increasing welfare, for welfare reforms are very important as well. I used to believe that it is mainly about righting our own wrongs, making the things right that we are the cause of, that are bad that we are the cause of. So obviously we created this horrible system and we have to solve it. I'm going to show a slightly sad picture now that you probably all have seen. This is a polar bear. and she is too weak to find food. She's walking around here and she can't find food and she's hungry. And this picture has gone all over the world, and people said or used this as a demonstration of the consequences of climate change. Do you remember? And there was one biologist who's an expert in polar bears, and he said, well, actually, this is not the consequence of climate change. This is the way that these animals just die in the wild, whether there's climate change, whether there's people or not. This is the way they die. They just at some point get old and weak, and they cannot find food anymore. They're too weak for that, right? We think that many animals might die of old age in nature, but just dying of old age doesn't really exist. It always comes with a lot of complications. The point here is that I think that what matters is suffering, and it doesn't matter so much. It makes a difference, but ultimately it doesn't matter so much whether we created that suffering or nature created that suffering. I want to care also about this animal, right, who is suffering because of nature, not because of us. And in nature we know, and there's been talks here before at this conference about the topic wild animal suffering or wild animal welfare. We know that in the wild, animals suffer from all kinds of things like starvation and disease and predation and all kinds of things. And you just have to realize that when an animal has a toothache or loses a limb or something, they won't be helped by a doctor in the wild, right? So it is something that at some point we have to start caring about too, and I'm sure that in the future technology may help us find solutions. In any case, this creature, suppose it's living in freedom, it has all the rights that you want to give it, but what are rights without well-being, right? We want to care for their well-being as well, not just about their freedom and their autonomy. So rather than thinking it's just about righting our own wrongs, I think we should care about the wild animals also. Maybe the most controversial point where I changed my mind, or I am in the process of changing my mind, is the idea, which I used to think, that no form of domestication is ever okay. I made exception, and I still make exception for companion animals, dogs and cats. I don't think that's necessarily wrong. And there's many dogs here. They give us so much love. We give so much love to them. It doesn't necessarily need to be wrong. But I know that some people would want to question that as well. What I'm talking about here is basically this old question that is asked by meat eaters: what would happen to all the animals if the world went vegan? You know, what's going to happen then if all the world goes vegan? And some people say, well, that's obvious. If all the world goes vegan, then animals will take over the world, right? That's probably not going to happen. What is more likely to happen is that many animals might go extinct. And maybe that's not entirely true, but the thing is that I've started to think about what does a vegan world actually look like in terms of the animals that will be around, right? And it's actually a good sign that I, or maybe you too, can ask this question, because it means that maybe this vegan world is getting closer and closer. And at some point we'll have to ask, okay, we are going to achieve this. What is it going to look like in terms of animals? Let me show you very briefly which categories of beings are around on this planet. One way to categorize them is this: there are people, right? There are pets, and I know companion animals is the politically correct term, but it didn't fit in the circle, so I write pets. There is, or there are, the farmed animals, and don't pay attention too much to the size of the circles. Farmed animals, of course. There are also the wild animals. And then there's also a category that we call the liminal animals. Have you heard of them? Liminal animals are the animals living on, they're not wild, they're not domesticated, but they're living in between. They are using the leftover food from people or the trash from people. So they're like pigeons and rats and those kind of animals, right? And then there's a very, very small category of animals, and they are the animals living on sanctuaries, animals like these, right? And so now the question is, if you look at this picture, what would remain, which groups would remain in a vegan world? So I think that, first of all, of course, we want to get rid of the farmed animals. They would be more or less gone. Some people might want to get rid of the pets as well, not the companion animals. Not everybody would want that. We would also, in the end, get rid of animals in sanctuaries, because if there's no farmed animals anymore, there would be no overflow anymore to sanctuaries, I guess. And maybe we want to get rid of the liminal animals around us in our cities, etc. as well, and we want to keep only the wild animals. But I just explained that animals in the wild don't necessarily have a very good life. So who do we want around? And you might say this is hubris, this is very arrogant of people to like decide who we want around on this planet, but I think it's going to happen anyway. We will, in the end, could be in the next 50 or 100 or 1,000 years, whatever, we will help decide which animals are here and which are not. And I started to think that given that the situation in the wild is also not so wonderful all the time, that maybe a situation where animals and humans can live together and help each other might be one of the best ways for animals to live on this planet, right? So if you look at what we can offer to animals, that is food and shelter and protection from predators and even medical care, that's all things that they don't get in the wild. And we could have animals around in a situation where they almost feel entirely free. They don't necessarily, I mean, we don't want to confine them, but we can imagine situations where they're almost, it feels as if they are free. And on the other hand, I mean, I think if we give this, if we offer this to animals, but they don't offer us anything in return, then there will be very few animals around, because it's not a give and take. You know, there would be only some sanctuaries where some very well-meaning people against the flow are putting a lot of money in saving a couple of animals. I just don't think that might not be the ideal situation. I think it might be good to have animals around us, that we continue to live with animals and that we keep being compassionate with them and cultivate that compassion for other species, so that we can also learn to have compassion for the animals outside of our culture, the wild animals. And so it might be interesting if, while we give these things to them, animals may give some things to us, and there is a give and take, there's some kind of trade, and maybe that could be companionship, but we could imagine sheep doing grazing for us, or maybe even we can have cows that are treated incredibly well, and we now and then take some cells from them, entirely harmless. They are living on sanctuaries or among us, and we take some cells for clean meat, no matter what you think of clean meat. They could give us manure, they could give us wool, maybe in some cases, on a very small scale, they could give us some eggs. And the point here is that to think that every use is necessarily abuse is, I think, a mistake. I mean, there can be, like I said, a give and take, and that is what I call a symbiosis. Living together, humans and animals, the problem is, of course, they cannot give consent to us. We cannot really know what they want, but maybe we can research that further. Anyway, this is something to think about further. I haven't reached any conclusion about that. The next one, second to last one, is I always thought, and I was brought up with the idea that I shouldn't care about money. Money I saw as something that was evil, that was the cause of everything that was wrong in the world. Until, and I was actually already 44 years old, so that's pretty late in my life, and I wish that you learn it faster, the ones who are younger than I am, that money is just a means to an end, and that we can use it to do a lot of good, and that in this world, whether we like it or not, we need money to do good, or we can use at least money to do good. So I think if you can use money wisely and save it and invest it in a nice way, etc., and have more money than you would otherwise have had, you can use that for donations. You can use that to do volunteer work for an entire year because you have a bit of a financial buffer, or to set up your own vegan business or whatever. So just don't ignore the importance of money. Don't think that it's noble not to have any. Okay? And again, I said, if you want to be good and wise, then quote Gandhi. I don't know if this is like an original quote or an apocryphal quote, but here the quote says, be the change you want to see in the world, and if you can't be that change, then either get out of the way of the person who wants to be that change, or support the individual with your financial resources, right? Not sure if Gandhi ever said that, but the internet said. said this. So, one last graph. This is the donations that, or the budgets of some big animal groups, 2014, 2016. You see how, for instance, Mercy for Animals grew from having a budget of $5 million to $12 million. That is thanks to people giving money to them that they hopefully earned in an honest way. But thanks to these resources, Mercy for Animals and all these other groups can save a lot more animals. They can put people to work, they can get more staff, and they put more hours into saving animals, right? So instead of thinking that I shouldn't care about money, I now see money as a key to change. And then the last one, I used to think that it would take centuries, that it would take centuries for us to achieve our goal. When people asked me, maybe in interviews or something, will we ever stop consuming animal products? Will we ever stop eating meat? I said yes to that question, but inside I was thinking, yeah, very long-term science fiction things, right? In a couple of ages, we might all stop eating animals. And I've seen so many things happening in just the last few years, or just the last few weeks. This is a pork giant creating plant-based alternatives and offering plant-based alternatives. Everybody is getting into this right now. And you might think this is a bad thing. I mean, I can understand your frustration. You might say, like, look, these horrible companies, they profited from the murdering and torturing of animals for such a long time. And now that it's finally profitable, they're going to also profit from selling alternatives. Yes, I can understand that's hard to accept. But I think that if you want to change things, you need these big players. And moreover, if you allow them to join our team and to sell plant-based products, then what happens is that they will be much less resistant to the vegan change and the vegan growth, right? They will stop sabotaging us. They will stop resisting. So that's very important. Here's another sign of the times. Do you know this? This was an ad for the Beyond Meat burger, and it was shown during the Super Bowl in the United States. So this is the most expensive advertising slot in the world, I think, and it was filled up partly by a vegan ad. Would you ever have dreamed this 10 years ago? I didn't. So what we're also seeing is, for the first time, people in mainstream media asking the question, will we stop eating meat at some point? More and more people, not vegans, not just vegans, are asking this question. And what's more and more people are starting to tentatively reply to this in the affirmative. And not just vegans, but for instance, the CEO or the ex-CEO of Tyson Foods, one of the biggest meat companies in the world, saying the future of meat might be meatless, might be plant-based or clean meat. So rather than thinking that it will take centuries, I'm now thinking that we may live to see it. Or at least you may live to see it. I'm a bit older, right? But you may live to see this change that we all want. Let me end by going back to where I started. I said that some doubt is good, and I emphasize some doubt. Doubting too much is not good either, because you will end up in analysis paralysis. You will be paralyzed by analyzing and by hesitating and by doubting. This graph or picture says it all. You know, the time cost of strategy A, strategy B, and then analyzing which strategy you're going to follow. People who are familiar with effective altruism might be also familiar with this dynamic, that they spend too much time on thinking about what they're going to do. That's, of course, not good. So we have to have a certain degree of certainty, right? Also because I very much believe, and it is a bit disrespectful to some people maybe, but this philosopher, I think, tried to identified one of the biggest problems in the world, what he thought, and he said it like this: the whole trouble with the world is that the stupid are cocksure and the intelligent are full of doubt. Does that ring a bell? Can you recognize that in the world? That the people who are actually wise and intelligent, they have so much doubt because they know that the situation is more complicated. And the people who are less of an expert, they are so sure of themselves, even though their opinion is, with all due respect, bullshit, right? So let me end by being a bit more certain. Let me end by saying what I do know for sure. I know for sure that what we are doing to farmed animals is terrible. There's no question about that. There's also no question that we don't need to do that. I also know for sure that more and more people are starting to realize that, and I trust that most people can find within them enough compassion to change. And most of all, what I'm sure of is that we are an incredible group of very committed, very dedicated individuals, people like you who will not stop until this is over, who will not stop until we have this compassionate world. Thank you very much.